Redditors who have been clinically dead, what did you experience in death, if anything? I coded after surgery. I remember being able to see and hear everything and understand what was happening, but I couldn't physically feel anything. It was deeply unsettling. My heart also stopped after surgery 3 years ago. I only remember them getting me back and rifting between darkness and seeing the nurses panic. Like you mentioned, I felt nothing and was just an impartial observer. The aftermath was the worst. Realizing how close I was to oblivion and recalling the dissociation was horrifying. People often say, oh, I'm not worried, she's a fighter, when someone gets very ill. But me? I feel like I was just ready to watch myself fade into the dark despite being content and having things to live for. Unsettling is exactly the right word. My wife and I discussed this at length 4 years ago. She died twice in 3 months, needing full resuscitation both times. Both were lengthy rescues. One resuscitation was off and on for nearly 40 minutes. I asked her later, when she had recovered, if she remembered anything at all during the time she was clinically dead. She remembered nothing. Blackness. No light. No relatives and former pets waiting for her. Just black. Thankfully, also no pain. She finally passed 18 months ago, and I hope she felt no pain or worry the final time. Edit to add. It started with 2 spontaneous brain bleeds. Technically, it started with her having lupus. The first brain bleed led to her passing, but they did a craniotomy, revived her, then a rebleed. The trauma from all that caused her lupus to set fire, which led to complete kidney failure and another cardiac arrest, passing and recovery, which led to 2 strokes. She recovered enough to be home and mostly independent, but having to go to dialysis 3 times a week for 3 years. She passed the final test to get on the kidney transplant list on Wednesday and had a massive cardiac/respiratory event at dialysis on Friday where she passed again, but was kept alive on life support. I waited a week hoping for recovery, but we disconnected life support per her wishes, a topic we had talked about many times. I don't know what I experienced while I was dead, but when I woke back up, so to speak, I remember wanting to experience it permanently. A friend of mine described death. She was technically dead twice, as being surrounded by darkness and floating with some sort of warm gel-like substance covering her. She never wanted to leave that state. Oh my GPD. That literally described the tanks that the machines used in the Matrix. Oh fuck. I died twice after I got MRSA into my heart area after a major surgery. I don't remember much of anything when I was out. Cliché as it was, I saw a light, but damn, that year sucked. When I was 15 I was scheduled to do a tilt table test. They lean you up at an angle on a table because I was consistently experiencing dizziness and fainting spells. After about 20 minutes the doctor tilted the table back and I could feel myself passing out. I got severe tunnel vision and lost like 95% of my eyesight, like looking through a straw, and then I blacked out. I remember hearing the doctor call the code and my father cussing at the doctor that he killed me. I remember hearing a lot of slamming and banging around, which I assumed was the crashed cart and nurses shoving into this small testing room. I felt a pressure on my chest, like when you have someone stand on your back to crack it, which I found out later was the nurses doing CPR. I saw an array of vivid colors kind of dancing around, forming objects in the dark. The scariest thing was how peaceful it felt. Just pure 100% peace. No panic, no pain, no sadness, nothing, just bliss. I coded for just under 2 minutes, and as soon as I came to and opened my eyes, I felt seriously angry and hostile. I started ripping off whatever I could get my hands on and yelling at the doctor to get me off the table. Clinically dead on 2 separate occasions. I didn't experience any visions or light and I didn't feel anything at all. It was like a switch was flipped and my existence was just shut off. Coming back was another story. Slowly I was able to hear the voices of those around me fading in, and they slowly got louder until I was able to open my eyes. That's it. Nothing spectacular. 1 second you're here, 1 second you're not. Not mine, but the head of my program was in a horrible car accident. She was dead for a few minutes on the scene while paramedics worked on her. She said it was the most amazing feeling she's ever experienced. It was black nothing, but that was perfectly fine, and she felt a comfort she can't even explain. She remembers being angry at the man working on her when she finally came back to her body because she wanted to stay there. She told us she can't wait to experience it again when it's really her turn. Friend of mine described it as deeply relaxing and that she could feel herself drifting away but was brought back just as she was ready to leave. After that, she embraced life and death. She said she doesn't fear death anymore since it was so relaxing to experience. I was electrocuted by about 13,800 volts. The doctors say it's likely the first hit stopped my heart and the second one started it before I was pulled like a lifeless corpse to safety. I remember experiencing the darkest dark and the most silent silence. I ceased to care that I was dying. Time seemed to change. It could have been hours it seemed. It was only about 30 seconds. I felt as though I was floating and floated towards something that I eventually realized was my body and reality. Upon joining with whatever it was I was floating towards, I became self-aware in my body and heard the electricity making horrible noises and knew I was in danger. From there it was a horribly painful experience where I lost most of my toes due to tissue death and had severe electrical burns on all 4 limbs. More surgeries than I care to count, and seeing the round bone ends of my toes that were freshly amputated still haunts me a little. My girlfriend is anaphylactic, and it is triggered by a chemical called salicylate, found in pretty much every food. When she was in high school she had her first big reaction, and the school nurses refused to administer her EpiPen, adrenaline shot, until the ambulance got there. Now obviously, having an anaphylactic reaction doesn't give you a lot of waiting time, so by the time the ambulance got to her school she was in pretty bad shape and barely conscious. The paramedics immediately administered one of her EpiPens, called the nurses fucking twats, and loaded her into the ambulance as her mother arrived. She continued to fade, so they gave her a direct injection of adrenaline this time, still nothing. They give her a second direct injection of adrenaline and this time it hits her about 30 seconds later all at once, and her heart fails. She stops breathing, no pulse, nothing. Dead to the world. For about 2 minutes and 46 seconds she was clinically dead. And the scariest thing is, she saw nothing. She tells me that when you are losing consciousness you can't tell the difference between waves of drowsiness and when your body actually shuts down. All she saw was the darkness of her eyelids, and it felt like going into an extremely calm sleep where she couldn't hear or feel anything, and she didn't mind it. All despite the fact her mother and the paramedics were screaming at her to keep her eyes open and the ambulance was flying towards the hospital. She miraculously just came back to life almost 3 minutes later as they were giving her chest compressions, and the cardiologist that assessed her later stated that all the adrenaline in her body was enough to not only stop her heart, but to also restart it with the little help from the paramedic pumping it around. But still to this day, she can't differentiate falling asleep after a long day and dying.